Hi, welcome. Sam Mirejovsky here behind the What's Right microphone. The What's Right show is on. My email, sam@whatsrightshow.com. That's where you can reach me. And I have to say, I'm so grateful to the many of you who have joined new this week that have found the program now that we're in this new format. And I'm grateful to have you. I really am. This is great. And please, I love hearing from you. And so shoot me an email. Let me know you're out there. I think for the benefit of some of the new folks joining the program here, I'm gonna share with you again my story of why I'm a conservative. Because I'm not a newcomer to this, folks. This is not something that I picked up last week and decided to try on. Because I have nothing better to do for an hour of my day. Okay, this is for me a lifelong thing. Now I, like many of you, I had the benefit of great parents who taught me well, and an enormous influence on me growing up, of course, were my mother and father, both of whom are still alive and have a story that's theirs that has influenced me. They escaped communism. They got out of what was then communist Czechoslovakia in 1968. It was right as the Russians invaded the country and quashed a period called the Prague Spring, where the communist regime was relaxing. The Stalinist era was in the rearview mirror, and the local Czech communists were trying to liberalize things. Okay. Free things up. The Russians said, no, we don't want this, brought in the tanks, and my parents escaped. And they went to Western Europe, and they eventually got to the U.S. And their story, right, it's a American success story, right? It's American dream coming to pass for people who really yearned their entire lives to come to America. And I want to put a pin in that because I'll come back to this as a recurring theme of my life, right? I grew up in a home, although my parents weren't American, at the time of my birth, I grew up in a home where my parents, day in and day out, told me how exceptional America was. My father would share stories with me about the time when he was a little boy and he was reading novels about the U.S. and he had a moment where he must have been 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, and he was reading about America. And he thought, I will never even see it. It was unimaginable in the 50s, right in the depths of Stalinism, to imagine a world where he would be able to even visit America, let alone someday live there, right? And so I was, I would go to school, and I would, as I got older, and I this of course happens when you begin to be politically aware, you start to understand that your teachers are not like your parents. Your teachers think differently. Some of them think terribly, and many of them, and I talk about teachers all the time. I talk about the indoctrination, unfortunately, that happens, I think, by design in our schools. I talk about this often. I had some phenomenal teachers. Yes, absolutely. I had great teachers who taught me science without interjecting politics. I had, some, not many, history teachers that stuck to the facts. But then I had, of course, and particularly as I got my way into high school, I had many teachers who taught me absolute nonsense. And, it was, you always need, in order to test your belief in something, you need a challenge, right? If you're just surrounded by everybody all the time that thinks like you do, you're never going to test your beliefs. And so I was the kid in class who would say, well, wait a minute. Wait, you're saying that communism is an alternative, okay? An alternative to the capitalist system. And this was, of course, in the 90s after the Soviet Union had already collapsed. I said, well, tell me where it's working. Well, tell me. I mean, literally, the entire Eastern Bloc just came apart. Tell me. And they said, well, you don't understand. It failed for other reasons, but it actually was quite nice over there, Sam. It was quite lovely. I had a high school teacher one time, I won't mention her name, who legitimately looked me in the eyes and told me that actually the communist system, socialism, that was conducted by the Russians, by the Soviets, and in the Eastern Bloc and the Warsaw Pact nations was a better system of government and did more for ordinary working class people than our capitalist system in the U.S. Now, here's where I had a leg up on my teacher, who was at the time, 25 years older than me. I had traveled because of my parents and because they had gone into exile, escaped communism. When the regime failed in 1989, when in November of 1989, the communist regime, as it did in many Eastern Bloc countries, collapsed in my parents' home country, I had an opportunity about 30 days later to visit. And I left, the comforts. I actually, when it was all happening, I was still in California. And then we had a long planned trip to visit some relatives in Switzerland for Christmas, and go to Italy as well. So we happened to be in, already have a trip planned to Europe in the midst of all of this happening. And so the collapse, and I'm just going to put a brief aside, for people who grew up with the Soviet Empire, the post-war Soviet Empire, the idea that it would so quickly come apart was inconceivable, and particularly people close to it. The inevitability that it would someday fail, I mean, it wasn't really that, it wasn't predetermined, right? This is not, common sense thinking would have it that it'll eventually fail, but not that it would all come apart so quickly. And it was a surprise to my parents, and we went ahead with our scheduled trip to Western Europe. And while we were there, the situation, word came back to us that this end of communism was very real. That the regime had fully stood down. It was a full abdication. And so I was able to, with my dad, jump on a train in December, right after Christmas of 1989. So roughly 5 weeks after the collapse of the regime, I got to Prague, and what I saw was tragic. Now, keep in mind, right? A few years later, I would be sitting in a classroom in Irvine, California, listening to some, card-carrying, unionized hack teacher, social studies, whatever the class was, history. It was a history class. It was high school, trying to tell me how great communism was for the ordinary man, woman, and child. What I witnessed a month after the collapse of communism will remain with me until the end of my life. I had never seen such poverty. Now, remember, it was an interesting type of poverty, because if you go to Prague, and some of you have visited, that's where I went. I was in the capital. It is an unbelievably beautiful city. It's unbelievably beautiful. And when you look close, and back then you had to look close because everything was black and brown. It was covered in soot. Because one of the great myths of the left is how great socialism is. They didn't care about the environment one iota, all right? They didn't give a rat's rear end about the dirty air that you got to breathe. They didn't care one bit. So everything was soot covered. I mean, it was disgusting. The sidewalks were you mean just unkept, to say the least. Weeds growing everywhere. And everybody was shabby, drab, went to the store. I mean, this was a shock. Again, remember, I grew up in America. And I'd heard, even at that point, once or twice from people telling me how great communism was. And I show up there and I'm like, what am I looking at here? What is this? store shelves empty. I haven't seen empty store shelves like that since, but for COVID, and that's a sort of a different situation. And I asked people, I said, "Is this the result of of the regime ending?" And they said, "No, this is normal." You'd go to the store and you'd say, "Well, do you have any yogurt? I'd really like some yogurt." And they said, "Come back in 3 weeks." I talked to people about cars. So when how many cars have you had in your life? One. We waited 3.5 years for it. We waited 5 years for it. We waited 8 years for it. Completely normal stuff. You couldn't just go out and get something. And then I would, again, this is a 9-year-old kid walking around, but I'm reasonably intelligent, and so I'm taking all this in, and I'm looking at everybody's house looks like crap. Everybody's apartment looks like crap. And I would ask my family members, what is this? Doesn't anybody take care of their own place? Why does everything look so run down and hideous? So, well, this doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the state. They let you live in it. You pay a little bit of rent. Everybody can afford it. But why would you invest any money? It's never going to be yours. It's not yours. It won't be yours. And it can be taken away from you moment's notice. You actually have a great example of the power of private property, and going back and looking at these houses that were so deteriorated after the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain fell across Eastern Europe. And one of the things always comes to mind on this is, when you own a house, you take care of it, right? And if you don't own it, you're probably less likely to take care of it. But there's another thing that was very big back then. And if you made your apartment look nice, and if it looked clean, and if it looked good, a member of the Communist Party could drive by and see, oh, look, that apartment up there looks really nice. Look, they put flowers in the window. Look, it's well taken care of. We want it. And they would make a phone call. They would write a letter to the bureau that administrates housing, and they could take it from you. Somebody with a ranking Communist Party official could just take it from you, whether it was in Prague or some small village. It didn't matter. So people were literally, when it came to private residences, people were incentivized not to take care of anything. Now try explaining this to a liberal. It's kind of over their heads, but all of this stuff, there are little things, right? Every bit of people were afraid. I still to this day, this is an interesting thing. I still to this day will talk to some of my cousins who grew up, my age, maybe a little younger, a little older, who grew up under communism. And there are things about the history that they don't know. They have no idea. And in some cases, I mean, obviously in school, they didn't, they taught them, they wouldn't teach them anything real, right? It was all communist history. But at home, their parents were too afraid to tell them the truth. What happens if your kid goes to school and says, well, I don't like the communists? Your father, your mother are going to end up getting called into the police station. They might be arrested. You might be taken from them. There were powerful incentives to never speak to your child or teach your child anything about that any truth, anything certainly that was critical of the regime. So it's a powerfully corrupting institution too. It wasn't just economic disaster. Now, this is what I grew up with in the most formative years of my life. As I saw this firsthand at 9 years old, and then I'd go back every year or so, typically in the summer, and I'd get this little, snapshot views year after year after year of how the country was lifting itself up out of this disaster. And it was a unbelievable thing to see. Is the antidote to everything I just described was freedom and capitalism. allowing people to be free and allowing them to economically participate in a market economy. Now, those years were privatization, right? It's not perfect. There's a lot of criticism around it, but within a decade, the country was unrecognizable. And a country that had once been wealthier than Germany in terms of per capita GDP before the war, that had then been taken over by 40 years of socialism and driven into the toilet, was now being reinvigorated by capitalism, by freedom, and by re-implementation of an open society. I bring all this up because this is this is what you're not going to hear from Zahir Mamdani, right? You're not going to hear this from AOC. And the funny thing is, right, when these people begin speaking about history and AOC speaking about geography, what was that the other day? Well, Venezuela, anything. Oh yeah, Venezuela below the equator. Not true. But it's other stuff, right? It's economics. These people talk about economics. They talk about history. They have no clue. My conservatism is based on my experiences of history, of pivotal events that I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm an eyewitness to the miracle that is the free market and the miracle that is a free and open society. And my biggest allergy today, as I look at what's happening here in the US, or was happening under Joe Biden, what's happening in much of Western Europe, where you have so-called, free governments, free countries who want to police what you say. They want to arrest you and fine you, take away your privileges to express yourself online if you say things that are against political orthodoxy. They want to create wealth registries. They want to tax you and take away your money, your financial net worth, not by some tax scheme of income tax scheme, but like what is being suggested in California. Literally making a tax, putting in a tax that for entrepreneurs could see half or more of their entire net worth taken, not even by the federal government, but by the crappy state communist government that is California. And I look at this, I go, well, where have we seen this? Where has this existed? And most importantly, knowing the answer, how did that go for them? And the short takeaway is not great. It didn't go well at all. And back to my high school teacher. Who said, well, it was good for the little people, Sam. You don't understand. I showed up with a Babe Ruth candy bar. And my cousins looked at it like it was the single greatest thing that they had ever seen in their lives. That's a candy bar. It wasn't even a Walkman, right? A candy bar. They were excited. They didn't have meat some nights. Ordinary, working class people. Hell, they were living in a city even. They were living in the capital. They were wowed by the stuff. Much of liberalism is only possible because of sheer and complete ignorance. And that's one of the truths that have to be said about what the left does. It's willful ignorance. It's constant propaganda. It's lie after lie after lie. And And by the way, this is my big belief. We were going to save our country when we begin teaching real history in schools. Real history. None of this made up stuff, woke stuff. It's just, that's the most important thing. All right, quick break here. Sam Mirejovsky on the What's Right Media Network. Sam at what'srightshow.com is my email. Be right back. Hi, Sam Mirejovsky here for Sam and Ash Injury Law. I am the Sam from Sam and Ash, and let me tell you, I get this question every week. Every week, somebody here from the show reaches out to me and says, Sam, I appreciate that you're putting the word out about your firm. I just would never, ever hire a personal injury lawyer. It's not my thing. It's not what I'm going to do. It's not how I operate. I'm going to handle it on my own, and that's going to be that. And, when I get an email like that, I take the time to respond. And here's what I say. You don't realize how bad the insurance companies have got. It used to be that they would perhaps treat you fairly, that they would pay your claim in full, that they would give you what was right. And where it's gotten now is they run you around and around. They send you stuff in the mail. They call you. They ask you all these questions. They have you submit all this paperwork. And this goes on days, weeks, months. At the end of it, you get this payout and you think, all right, but where's the rest? I'm missing $2,000. I'm missing $1,500. I'm missing $1,800. I'm missing $3,500. This is what I hear from people. This is when people call me. They call me because they're frustrated. The reason I exist, the reason that firms like mine are around is because the insurance companies do not do the right thing. And it is a fool's errand to think that you are so special that that won't happen to you. So don't be that guy, all right? 800-304-2000. 800-304-2000. samandashlaw.com. No recovery, no fee, doesn't cost you any money out of pocket. And at the end, I promise you, you'll be better off with a lawyer in your corner. Do it. Sam and Ash Injury Law, because you deserve what's right. Yesterday, we received news that the Reverend Jesse Jackson, a fixture in political circles in my life growing up, passed away, 84 years old. And responses to his death are very different, folks. Obviously, the left, has Jesse Jackson up there in the pantheon of the greats. On our side of the aisle, we have a fair amount of criticism. And today is not the day, is my point, right? Today is not the day. I'm not going to do that. And here on the What's Right show, we're going to try to find something nice to say about Jesse Jackson. By the way, my email, sam at what'srightshow.com. Reach me with comments, questions, concerns, and on Twitter, on X, at What's Right Sam. So one thing that is fascinating, when you go back in the annals of Jesse Jackson history, he did have a decent record of freeing hostages and POWs. Syria in 1984, a Navy pilot was shot down over Lebanon, secured his release. President Reagan even gave Jackson credit for it. Cuba 1984, met with Fidel Castro, got 22 Americans released who are being held by the regime there. Ditto in Iraq, Kuwait, 1990, Serbia, Yugoslavia, 1999. There he got a congressional commendation for his work. So, this is something that can be remembered and thought of. Now, I did in the midst of the news, I woke up to it, sent Tim Conway Jr., my good friend, radio host out in LA. I sent him my condolences because, of course, for Tim, the Reverend Jesse Jackson has been a font of comedic gold. He would have this, I don't know if he still does it. For years, he had a segment on a show, and it was called "What the Hell Did Jesse Jackson Say?" and he'd play a clip, and then he'd make his audience try to figure out what it was. So it was great because, I mean, Jesse Jackson was not good at articulating words. He had an unmistakable pronunciation and cadence that was slow, labored, and largely unintelligible. So, I texted Tim, and I said, "Hey, my condolences. Jesse will be missed." And Tim responded, just with this one clip that he played, and this is, it's an actual clip of Jesse Jackson. This was at a telethon. Somebody had parked their Nissan Altima in a spot that was blocking access, and he got on the mic and said this.
That was an Altima ALTMA 4899410. Please move it now. You're blocking someone.
I don't know if that was your Altima. Would you know what? I mean, no. But just classic Jesse Jackson, 84 years old. All right. I'm gonna get to the transgender. What do you want me to say? What is there to say about this? Another trans shooter, another angry man, woman out there that felt that the world was doing him dirty, who literally wrote online that there would be, hell to pay and various other threats in a reaction to perceived slights against him and transness, right? Generally speaking, the amount of trans violence here is it's going up. And by the way, you'd notice it's crickets from the media, absolute crickets. So here's what happened Monday, and we didn't know a lot about this right when it happened, but we heard about a shooting at an ice hockey rink during a high school hockey game. This is in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And the shooter here tweeted out on Sunday, "Don't be so butthurt." Butthurt. Okay. Over somebody different. Then wonder why trans people, PPL, go FKN berserk. A berserk is in all caps, probably an ode to Trump. By the way, he also had a bunch of anti-Trump tweets. Also, apparently a Nick Fuentes fan. So well, I've been highly critical of Nick Fuentes now for some time, and I feel fairly vindicated in this. He might have possibly had some Nazi SS tattoos. He tweeted out that, no, well, I'm not going to, I don't know. Look, he's a mental case. That's the takeaway. A mental case. His wife, or now ex-wife, but when they were married, when she filed for divorce, she first cited gender reassignment surgery, narcissistic and personality disorder traits as grounds for seeking out of the marriage. This is what it is, right? So look, I reopen the asylums. We have a mental health problem. And by the way, I'm consistent about this. I don't, do we take guns away from trans people? No, we take trans people who are nuts, and we get them help. That's what you do here. It's really straightforward. This guy was a perpetual victim. He lived in his father-in-law's house even after the parents, even after he was divorced from his wife. After the transition, the father-in-law said he wanted him out. This guy, of course, ran to the authorities. He got the father-in-law charged with intimidation. He accused his own mother of assault. What a piece of work. Ah, boy. So I saw the piece. The Atlantic put out a piece yesterday about the slow retreat on youth gender medicine. They said literally the piece was called "The Tide Goes Out" on youth gender medicine. American doctors no longer united on the wisdom of medicalizing gender dysphoria in minors. And that's because kids are likely to grow out of this stuff. And that's because kids, and I'll say this too, adults the same, probably need mental health treatment. Now, it's a free country, so I'm all for an adult making decisions for themselves. If they want to, add body parts, subtract body parts, do it. But you can't go and shoot people. And if there are signs of mental illness, that person ought to be committed. Instead, what is happening, and this is the problem. Instead, what is happening with these people is that the way the liberals have worked society, we're catering to their every whim. We have serious people in the media and in politics who are leftists, yes, but they're nonetheless serious people who have followings, who have people that listen, who basically say very similar things to what this guy wrote in his tweet. Again, don't be so butthurt over somebody different, wonder why trans people go berserk. In other words, it is our fault that he did what he did, that he killed people, because we weren't nice enough to him. We weren't accommodating enough to him. And of course, it's nonsense because he sent out a tweet that 100% of his gender reassignment surgery was covered by his health insurance. Read probably the state, because this guy doesn't seem like he was very gainfully employed, living with his ex-wife's parents. My goodness. The problem is, right, and it goes back again, we were talking about this yesterday with Charlie Kirk. There are more people than you even want to know that are walking among us that honest to goodness believe that what happened to Charlie Kirk was, at least in significant part, Charlie Kirk's fault. That Charlie Kirk said things about trans people that angered Tyler Robinson and made him shoot him, and that it was entirely avoidable. It was all entirely avoidable. If only Charlie Kirk had moderated his speech. And this is, to me, the most dangerous part of the whole trans thing, because it's not really about the surgery or the men dressing as women, pretending to be women, and vice versa. It's really not about any of that. It's about the corruption of truth. It begins with the absurd lie that a man can become a woman. A man can pretend to be a woman. A man can dress as a woman. A man can think he is a woman. And we can have a reasonable debate on whether we accommodate that out of politeness. But what is fundamentally not true is that gender, sex can be altered, and that it is flippable by the powers of will and modern medicine. Transness is a political construct. But by getting us, by forcing us, and there are countries, look at this, Great Britain and as an example, the UK. If you go out and you misgender somebody, you get fined, you go to jail. If you don't teach transgenderism, you end up like that teacher that was arrested and has been in prison a year. Gets released and then gets rearrested immediately because he won't teach transgender ideology. It is no different from the Stalinist regime that my parents grew up in. That is so central to my life story of why I am a conservative. When our own country, in the United States of America, they demand that we play along with delusions. And then when we don't, when someone like me comes along, or Charlie Kirk or any number of individuals who publicly state their opposition to this insanity and call out the obvious lie that that dude over there is a dude and he's not a woman, no matter what he's done to his body. The left says, see, you've gone too far there. And while we don't condone it, it probably explains why you just got shot. Interesting, right? Now, that is why this battle is worth dying for. Because it's not about trans. It's not about, oh, Sam, just be nice to them. I'm not advocating, I'm not telling you to punch a tranny. I'm just telling you to speak truth. And I'm a huge advocate of being compassionate and kind to people no matter what they're going through. I just personally view it, I mean, there's people out there who think that they shouldn't have two arms. There's a condition where they say, I've got two arms. I need to have one of them amputated. And you go to a doctor and you say, doctor, I honest to goodness believe I shouldn't be able-bodied. And the doctor will put a 5150 hold on you, okay? Or ought to. But then you go and you say, well, doctor, I was born with this penis, but my gosh, I really don't think I should have it. I think you should take it off, invert it, and turn it into a neo-vagina. And charge it to the taxpayers for $65,000. I mean, you should see the look I'm making on my face, just wincing thinking about it. But anyway, right? And all of a sudden, everybody goes, oh, well, we got to respect that. How brave, how incredible, how amazing. It goes against nature. It's fundamentally messed up. So that's, but beyond that, where it affects me, and this is an important part of this, they'll always say, well, Sam, how does it affect you? It affects me because you want me to lie. The state is coercing me. Society is coercing me into lying. If I don't go against my belief on principle, and by the way, I know I'm right, and everybody else on this is crazy. Now that's a little bit of corruption. And communists would do this. Every totalitarian regime does this. They slowly chip away at your person by enlisting you in telling lies. And my father describes this growing up, again, in the 50s, under Stalin. You'd get a guy who was against the regime, and they got him, and they arrested him, and they threatened him with this. Or you can just go and publicly declare that communism is the best. So out he'd go in public square, and he'd read a statement. And it broke people, right? Fundamentally broke them. Now, the left will go out of its way to protect speech when it comes to their propaganda. This is a very important point that I need to make. Last week, there was, and there's been a handful of these. There's an Olympic skier, Hunter Hess, who was asked at a press conference, is it a challenge to represent the U.S.? And he gave this just really sad answer about it, where he felt he had to give the reporter what he wanted to hear.
It brings up mixed emotions to represent the U.S. right now, I think. It's a little hard. There's obviously a lot going on that I'm not the biggest fan of, and I think a lot of people aren't. If it aligns with my moral values, I feel like I'm representing it. Just because I'm wearing the flag doesn't mean I represent everything that's going on in the U.S. So yeah, I just kind of want to do it for my friends and my family and the people that support me getting here.
Yeah. That's nice. So that happened last week. And then Monday, Whoopi Goldberg said this on The View.
People at home who are calling them losers and all these kind of
the
names.
president called him a loser.
There's but
I'd like to see him ski down a hill.
But here's the issue. they are entitled to feel how they feel.
Correct.
That is their right. And they are saying, I don't agree with everything. It's like when I was a kid, people said, my country, right or wrong. No.
Yeah.
If you're wrong, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And people are going to say you're wrong. So, you know, all these people who are criticizing these folks saying, stop talking, because in this country, we are still allowed. We are still allowed. It has not been outlawed.
Nope.
They can threaten it, but they haven't stopped it. We are allowed to say what we think and what we feel.
Well, I try going on The View and saying that a man who thinks he's a woman is a man and is probably a mental case. Watch how quickly these women would turn on you if you said that. And you say, oh, but Whoopi, this is what I think. This is what I believe. She says feel because that's all the left does. They just feel things. You know, this is very interesting how the liberal mind works. Sam Mirejovsky here on the What's Right Media Network. Click to follow. Make sure you've got the podcast What's Right Show wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, email me with questions, comments, concerns. Sam@whatsrightshow.com. Folks, I'll see you tomorrow.